You know, looking back, I feel that there have been a lot of strange Nintendo games over the past few decades. A ton of them becoming classics and even must-plays in some regards, despite them not being nearly as mainstream as the new 3D Mario and such. A lot of these games came out during the late 90s and early 2000s, at least the most notable games in the series have. And judging by the reception of these games, it is undeniable that the creativity Nintendo were putting into them at around this time just felt so much more unique and experimental. Most of these games coming out around the lifespans of the GameCube and the Game Boy Advance. This era is when I'd say characters and worlds were starting to become a lot more established. Certain characters were finally getting their iconic voices, 3D gaming as a whole started to become a lot more rectified, which meant that there are endless possibilities for how a character can interact with the world, etc. And although these series were starting to gain personality unlike ever before, we were still in a transitional area in a sense. Mario in particular was still super weird with experimental ideas and gimmicks. I mean, think about it. Not only a few years ago would he revolutionize gameplay and pave the way for several 3D platformers in the future, but he would also go on to make a whole new subgenre of platforming games that would go on to be perfected by others, and then be perfected by himself again. But although these achievements would pave the way for the company, and just gaming as a whole in some regards, at around the end of the lifespan of the N64, Nintendo needed something big to start off the life of what was only known as Project Dolphin. With the PS2 starting to take the world by storm, and Microsoft starting their life in the console industry, Nintendo had to start off the life of their new console, the GameCube, with the justice it deserved. What did we end up getting? Okay, now don't get me wrong, I love this game. I wouldn't be making a video about the whole trilogy if I didn't, but this being Nintendo's first launch title is a big factor into why I believe the GameCube flopped the way it did. You gotta understand, this was riding off the cusp of the Nintendo 64. Whatever Nintendo was pushing had to live up to the revolution that console started. Now viewing it from a modern lens, we can appreciate this console way more for what it was. But try to view it in the perspective of someone from 2001. People wanted a continuation of Mario 64, something that would refine the flaws of that game and also add a lot more to it. And we wouldn't get that until a whole nother year after the lifespan of the console. So yes, although I do love this game, I can also see it as a way to justify why the console did not do as well as the competition at the time. With only being beat by the Xbox by a little bit, and literally incomparable to the success of the PS2. I mean, yeah, it at least beat out the Dreamcast, but like, I could probably sell Malaria at the time and it would outsell the Dreamcast. I hardly even count that as a win. Although this probably wasn't what the console needed at the time, it was still a pretty good system seller at the beginning of the console's lifespan. Just not as good as it could have been. Luigi's Mansion did end up being the best-selling game for the launch of the GameCube, so it was driving some sales. But at the end of the day, people wanted Mario, and we wouldn't get Mario for a few more months. Which doesn't seem like a big deal, but those months really counted in the consumer market. It may sound like I'm being needlessly rough on the game though, especially since we haven't even started talking about the game itself. So, what does Luigi's Mansion have to offer? It was said in many interviews that Luigi's Mansion was mainly meant to be a tech demo for what the GameCube was capable of, generally showing off how it handled physics and just simply graphical fidelity of the system. And if that's the case, it's definitely the best tech demo I've ever played. The game itself is relatively short, being able to be beat in an afternoon if you have the time. But what it lacks in general playtime makes up for in fairly solid, albeit repetitive at times, gameplay. Luigi's Mansion is unlike any Mario game ever made up to this point. And although that was a large point of ridicule back in the day, looking at it now, that's kind of what I really like about it. The core gameplay is locating ghosts inside the mansion and sucking them up with your vacuum, which is known as the poltergust. I see what you did there. Most of the game revolves around exploration of the mansion, and it makes for some genuinely tense moments. The whole aura around the mansion, as well as the phenomenal lighting for 2001, still makes this a very visually impressive looking game, even by today's standards. And yes, this is obviously very different from the core Mario gameplay, and I can see how it seems weird that Nintendo of all companies were making something that technically falls into the survival horror genre. I can definitely see why that may be a cause for concern. But obviously, it's in the Mario franchise, so it's still super tame. But choosing Luigi as the main character of this game was a genius. Luigi is always portrayed as the timid, more cowardly of the brothers, and having the protagonist be scared more than the actual audience makes this game more funny than anything. and in a good way too. That doesn't take away from the atmosphere being genuinely unsettling at some times though. Like I said earlier, the lighting and environments can give off a sense of unease, as well as the fact that we haven't really figured out 3D graphics yet, which also added to the potential fear factor. That's also something I made an entire video on a while ago. Anyways, with the combination of atmosphere and very solid gameplay, it's no wonder why Luigi's Mansion started to become a cult classic over time, even being labeled as the first game under the Player's Choice box art. Although looking at this box art for too long is the equivalent of squeezing lemons in your eyes, it did incentivize that this game was starting to grow on players over time, but it just was not the system seller Nintendo needed. Much like most Mario games, the plot of Luigi's Mansion is very straightforward. Luigi was informed that he had won a mansion in a contest he did not enter, so him and Mario decide to check out the place during the evening to find that the house was nothing like advertised. Mario is nowhere in sight, so Luigi ventures into the mansion to find his brother when he gets attacked by ghosts, but is saved by new character Professor Egad, equipped with the Poltergust 3000. After some dialogue, Egad entrusts Luigi to rid the house of its evil and find his missing brother. After that, the game wastes no time into getting you into gameplay, only occasionally being called by Egad to inform you about your current whereabouts and happenings inside the house. The sections of the game are split up into 4 chapters, all of them focusing on separate areas of the house. To capture ghosts, you first need to reveal their hearts by shining your flashlight on them, then suck them up with the Poltergust until the ghost health bar reaches 0. There are many types of ghosts, the most common ones generally having the same types of attacks, with just higher or lower health bars, as well as the more uncommon ones, such as the grabbing ghosts, which latch onto your neck and will stay there, slowly chipping away at your HP until Luigi shakes them off. There are also special types of ghosts known as portrait ghosts, which most of the time aren't inherently enemies and are more puzzles that you have to solve. Most of the time after capturing one, you'll get an item which is needed to progress. The reason why they are called portrait ghosts is because after every mission, once you return to Egad's lab, he uses a machine that he built that can turn ghosts into paintings on the captured souls, sealing them back into their frames. During the battles, ghosts will drop a multitude of pearls, which are very high in value and will greatly increase your treasure count. You could also find boos throughout the mansion too, 50 to be exact. What will happen is that your radar, aptly titled the Game Boy Horror, will start flashing red, which means a boo is nearby. After you find it, you can collect one and it will go to being able to progress. After some exploration in a boss fight, eventually King Boo reveals himself to be the one behind all the supernatural occurrences in the house and becomes the main antagonist of the game. You fight him at the end in his weird Bowser mech thing, and after you defeat him, Mario is freed from the painting King Boo trapped him in, and Luigi laughs in what I can assume to be glee as he is finally reunited with his brother. Depending on how much treasure you collected during the game, Egad will use it to get you a non-haunted house built on the property. Overall, even if Luigi's Mansion was not what the GameCube needed at the time, it started to go down as one of the best titles on the system as more people got to appreciate the rest of the library along with it. The D-Rank house is also the canon one. So a whopping 10 years after the launch of the first Luigi's Mansion, we finally got a sequel. Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon was released on the 20th of March in 2013, being developed not in-house like the last one, but by a sub-studio of Nintendo known as Next Level Games, most known for the Punch-Out Wii game as well as the Mario Strikers series. Now that may make the game sound like it will be really good. Next Level Games, although not having the biggest library of published titles, usually always hit when they put out something. The Mario Strikers series to this day is still one of the most prominent examples of characterization for the Mario characters, and this game literally revived Punch-Out, like I think they know a thing or two. And you know, I think objectively, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon is a very solid game. I do have some gripes though, like the lighting on a lot of locations is way too bright and doesn't really give off the feel of creepy mansion that the first game did. Like, compare these two bathrooms. Yeah, the lighting isn't bad in either of them, but the first is just a lot more atmospheric and really gives Luigi merit to be holding that flashlight. But we should save general nitpicks like that for later. So, how's the opening? Well, after the first game, Egad continues his science stuff and now the ghosts are friendly. The general gist to why is that there are these fragments of crystals in the sky that make up this object known as the Dark Moon. The energy radiating off of it makes the ghost passive and lets Egad continue his research of them. But then King Boo shows up and turns all the ghosts evil by shattering the Dark Moon. We know that they're evil now because they lost their pupils, and if history has told us anything, no pupils equals evil. castle. So after this, EGAD contacts Luigi with help of keeping the ghosts at bay once again, as well as fighting all the shards of the Dark Moon and stopping King Boo. Dark Moon, gameplay-wise, isn't all that different to that of the first, just with some new added content and different progression. Instead of one big mansion to explore with certain chapters focusing on certain sections of the house, we now instead get 5 buildings to a smaller scale. A change that I honestly welcome. It's very different from before, and we spend a lot less time in mansions, but as the next game will prove, this title is an absolute lie. Anyways, yeah, the 5 areas consist of a traditional haunted mansion, another mansion but tall, a clock tower area, a snowy mineshaft, and finally the treacherous mansion, which is also the most expansive area of the game. Instead of your one sole goal being to rescue Mario, you're instead tasked with multiple things to do around a certain area, such as rescuing Toads and things like that. At the end of the stage, there's a boss fight that you have to complete, then you can move on to the next area. There are also some different changes that make the gameplay a little bit more engaging too. Shining your flashlight on a ghost has been changed to actually having to charge your flashlight to stun them instead of just pointing it at the ghost. We also have this new dodge mechanic that works well with evading enemy attacks without having to undo your progress with dealing with a ghost, but it does come at expense to your charge meter, which also adds another fun trade-off for the game. On the topic of new gear, we will also have this dark light, a new alternate fire for the flashlight that can reveal invisible objects to help you progress or even some secrets. There's really not much to say about this gadget since you're not really going to be using it that much. And when you are in an area which you do have to use it, it will be painfully obvious for anyone playing. Money also has a bit more of an incentive now as well. The cash you collected in the first game ended up going to what was basically just a letter grade with how much cash you collected going towards your new mansion. But in this game, the amount of money you collect will also go towards upgrades for your flashlight and dark light, allowing them to have better charge and increase the time you can use the dark light. You know, in the first game, there are these Shy Guy ghosts with masks that you had to take off so you could defeat them? There are a lot of ideas like that in this game too. But now instead of them being their own unique types of ghosts, they are instead now just wielding sunglasses, welding masks, and sometimes even swords and shields. Boos are back too, and honestly, they're a complete waste of time. Instead of needing them to progress like in the first game, there's one Boo hidden in every mission. Collecting all of them in a certain area unlocks a bonus stage, which is just a time attack minigame. The incentive to find Boos in this game has been completely bogged down, and honestly, when revisiting this one, I didn't even bother to collect all of them like I did the 50 in the first. But while we're on the topic of ghosts, we need to address the elephant in the room. Where are the portrait ghosts? This is one of the removed features that I think make people not like the ghosts in this game. In the first, we had so many unique ghosts with their own personalities, motives, and even attack patterns in some cases. Here, we have none of that, and I'm gonna be honest, I do prefer these ghost designs for the common enemies more to the original designs, but it just kinda gets boring after a while. One of the things that made the first game more refreshing is just when it starts to feel it's getting repetitive, you'll find a portrait ghost with its own unique way of trying to catch it. Here, we don't have any of that, and I think it really takes away some of the charm the first game had with its enemy variety. One thing that I will give this game over the original though is that the environments are so much more unique than the first. Sure, you won't be spending as much time in a mansion per se, and although that might not make sense to some people as the game is literally called Luigi's Mansion, I'd say it works in favor for how the mission structure is in this game. You'll always be able to tell which area is which, and it really helps from the repetitiveness of the first. So although there is a sacrifice of some enemy variety, I do believe that the actual level variety is much more lively in this one. The mission structure itself in this game is kind of annoying at times though. You will be constantly called back to EGAD's lab after every single mission, and it gets super annoying after like the 5th time. And I did not remember this being nearly as much of a problem as I feel it is now. But I guess playing it off of an emulator and not the portable console of origin may do that to you. Anyways, after you conquer every area in the valley, you will finally have your final showdown with King Boo. This battle I'd say is a huge step up to the one in the first game, mainly because you're actually fighting King Boo and not a mech. But not only that, the fight has so many different phases that can really throw you on your toes if you aren't paying attention. But of course, at the end of the day, you end up beating King Boo, Luigi collects a Chaos Emerald, Mario is rescued once again, and the Dark Moon is restored. So, that was Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. Overall, I do think it's a better experience than the first. The areas are a lot more unique, and the mission structure, although a negative for long play, makes sense for quick bursts of gameplay that you'd be doing with a portable console. And yeah, there were corners that were cut, with the designs of the ghosts themselves and the incentive to collect boos, but I feel that the game generally improved on a lot of the gripes that I had with the first one, even if it had its shortcomings. But there is a big reason to why I do prefer this game over the first, and it's kind of personal. So if that doesn't interest you, here's a timestamp to where I start talking about 3. I still have a really soft spot for this game because I still remember getting it for like my 8th birthday, and it was the first game that I would ever look up a walkthrough for. Really, this game is what made me get into content creation, as it was the first thing to make me discover YouTube. I obviously knew of the site back then, but seeing all these videos incentivized that yes, this is what I wanted to do when I get older. And it's kind of surreal to be talking about this game now in a sense that over 20,000 people have found this entertaining enough for me to talk about. If 8-year-old me saw this, I knew he'd be extremely proud. Dumb sappy comments aside, it would be another 6 years before the next Luigi's Mansion. Skipping the Wii U for any release and re-releasing the first game for the 3DS near the end of the console's lifespan. But in 2019, we finally got the true 3rd installment. Was it worth it? Luigi's Mansion 3 encapsulates all the good from the first 2 entries, and trims all the fat that was unneeded as well. The standard of it being a showcase for hardware also kinda continues with this one, as this is one of, if not the best looking first party game on the Switch. Seriously, everything about this game looks stunning. Next Level Games are once again the ones who developed the product, and they have already proven themselves to be one of the best when it comes to character expression for Nintendo characters. The game begins with this great cutscene of the brothers, Princess Peach, and some toads taking a little vacation to a hotel known as the Last Resort. This title is a lie. Anyways, you get a feel for the controls as well as interact with some of the staff, as well as the owner of the hotel, Helen Gravely. Helen Gravely. Alright. Anyways, everyone checks into their rooms, Luigi exercises his brain for half a second to send himself to sleep, and all seems well. Until Princess Peach calls out in distress in the middle of the night, waking Luigi up to investigate. And I know that I already said Next Level really knows how to make these characters expressive, but this is probably some of the most expressive any Nintendo character has been up to this point. The facial expressions and body language on Luigi as he walks around during the first few opening areas show off emotions of fear super well. The fact that they were able to visualize this level of emotion in not just the cutscenes but gameplay too is extremely impressive, and possibly some of the most detailed animation in the video games industry right now as a whole. Eventually, we find the hotel owner again, and whoa, she's actually a ghost. I cannot exemplify how happy I was to see ghosts with this kind of character design for the first time again. This meant the return of portrait ghosts, or at least more unique boss ghosts to take out as you progress further into the hotel. But like I was saying, Gravely reveals that she is a fan of that King Boo fella, and then he explains that she broke him out of Egad's lab after the events of the last game. As vengeance, King Boo traps Mario and everyone else in paintings, and as he is just about to do the same to Luigi, he swiftly escapes down a laundry chute. Down here, you'll require the poltergeist once again, and you are given the cutest tutorial ever. And now, once again, you have the goal to save your brother and friends and take out King Boo. One thing that I really like about this game is that Luigi actually gets to keep his moves from Dark Moon, such as the charge and blacklight at the start of this one. That's right, no Metroid nonsense here. One new move given to you by default is this new jump mechanic. Honestly, you're not going to be using it much during gameplay, and I think it would have been better if Luigi was just able to jump without having to use this jetpack thing. Like, his whole gimmick outside of Luigi's Mansion is that he has a higher, floatier jump than Mario. I feel it would have worked in this game's benefit to just let him jump normally if they were gonna let him jump at all. Oh well, I guess. I can suspend my disbelief enough for it to not get on my nerves too much. Gameplay has once again been rectified tenfold. One of the things that have changed from Dark Moon is sucking up ghosts. Ghosts have become a lot harder to capture, and they have a lot more HP than before. But we also have a much easier time filling up the charge meter. And unlike before where Luigi would just do a harder tug, Luigi straight up slams the ghosts into the ground, which does massive takeaways of HP. Something about this is so much more satisfying than that occasional tug from the last entry. Of course, this now means that you can basically continuously charge on the ghost until you fill up the meter just one time. Hence why ghosts now have much more HP than previously. Another new tool in your arsenal is this plunger mechanic. You can use this to fling around physics objects to clear out certain areas and discover secrets. Something that is also referenced in Luigi's Grab and Smash Bros. Ultimate. But, if we were talking about new additions to play, I would be dismissed to not talk about the most eventful inclusion that was pushed severely in the marketing. That being Gooigi. This is basically a gelatin-like clone of Luigi that you can use to get through spaces that would be impossible to reach by traditional means, such as inside drains or behind cages. This may make him sound really OP in some senses, but he has one detrimental weakness, that being of water, making Gooigi only practical in certain cases. The vacuum here controls just like how you would expect, and the combat, in my opinion, is the most refined here than it's ever been. Unfortunately, this entry does have the least amount of ghost variety in the series though, with there only being 5 different types of common ghosts, excluding variants. I can sorta understand this change though. This game was to put combat to the side and focus much more on the exploration and puzzle solving. From a development standpoint, I think this makes perfect sense. The areas in this game are so detailed that I would want players to take in the atmosphere as much as possible too. That doesn't mean ghost encounters are a rare sight though. You'll still definitely be running into a lot of them throughout your playtime, but not nearly as much as the first 2 previous entries. Progression is relatively the same from the first game too. Every floor has a boss of an elevator button that you'll need to take from them to be able to progress the higher floors of the hotel. The areas here get crazy at times too. Every floor has its own theme. It took the multiple stages from Dark Moon and made it have the same level of personality in different areas in one conjoint map, and it really works here. The bosses this time around are also a lot more akin to the bosses of the original game. Unique ghosts with a lot of personality, and they fit the theme of the floor that you're on too. The boss battles here are actually boss battles too, and not just glorified puzzles. Money in this game is not as useful as it was in Dark Moon, mainly being used for tracking locations for of-note things, such as booze. And of course, also going to your rank at the end of the game. Honestly, this change is fine. I didn't really like how the upgrade system worked in Dark Moon, but at the same time, I am happy that they gave cash a little bit more of a use, outside of just going to an end screen. Eventually, we do meet up once again with King Boo for a final showdown, and this boss fight is awesome. It takes place at the very roof of the hotel, giving it a sense of high stakes, literally. The boss fight is similar in concept to that of the one in Dark Moon, but it doesn't overstay its welcome. There's this cool mechanic where in the different stages of the boss fight, King Boo splits himself into even more copies of him, which makes it even more of a challenge to avoid his oncoming attacks. Eventually, you once again capture him with the poltergust and rescue all your friends. I love this ending. The ghosts are no longer under King Boo's control, but since the hotel was destroyed, the ghosts are now left without a home. But Egad starts the plan of building a new home from the ghosts, so they can have somewhere to stay. Everything about this ending just tugs at my heartstrings, man. This game has so many feel-good moments in here that you wouldn't expect to be there, but regardless they are, and I love it. But yeah, that was Luigi's Mansion 3, and the Luigi's Mansion trilogy as a whole. I feel that all of these games were brought into conception to showcase what the hardware it was built for was capable of. Every single one of these experiences showcases peak performance on any console or handheld they were on. Even if they had some really noticeable flaws at times, the short length and repetitiveness of the first, the mission-based structure and lack of personality and enemy variety in the second, the afterthought of things such as booze in the third, all of these flaws are worth pointing out. But even so, I don't see any of these as detriments and detractable from the general experience of the game. I think they still have so much to offer, and I haven't even touched on stuff like the multiplayer of Dark Moon and 3 either. These are unlike any Mario spin-off game to date. Sure, maybe the sports games are different enough from the core formula to be considered unique, but they just do not have the same personality as something like this trilogy had. The only thing that I would say that comes a little bit close would be like the Wario Land series, but at the same time, I just feel that Luigi's Mansion has never missed the mark. Unlike a lot of other spin-offs and even some mainline titles in the wider Mario series, all the most notable flaws of the series mainly come down to the console they were built for, and the time they were released. So I am much more forgiving of the flaws of these games more than I'd be for the flaws of, say, New Super Mario Bros. 2. Next Level Games have proven themselves to be capable of being the parent to this beloved series, and they should honestly be the ones working on more of the Mario spin-off games. The personality that they can put into these characters, and the surprising amount of freedom that Nintendo gives them that they'll never do themselves is astonishing, and I really want to see more of it in the future. Overall, the Luigi's Mansion trilogy is great, with the atmosphere being a fun mix of spooky and silly, the constantly evolving gameplay throughout titles, and just simply the charm of the concept as a whole. These games will be held in regard as some of the most influential and progressive games in the entire Mario franchise. Of course, Dark Moon being the one that I'll always hold in high regard, for it being the reason why I'm telling you all this today at all. But in conclusion, the series will always hold a special place in my heart. Happy Halloween, everybody. Hope this was a good video choice for the occasion. I mean, you'd have to enjoy it a little bit if you made it this far. If you did, then make sure to subscribe if you did enjoy it. I know I don't normally ask for subscribers, but playing all of these games in preparation for this video took a really long time, and I'd appreciate if you click that funny red button if you want to see more. I usually post videos like this every month, but I am going to try to have a better schedule of videos going forward. Make sure you also support my friend Grayiskis for drawing this amazing thumbnail for the video. I urge you all all to go follow her Instagram in the description, as she is genuinely talented and deserves a lot more recognition. Also, make sure to check out my podcast. Me and my co-hosts are gonna try our hardest to keep it up weekly, so I really hope we see you there. Anyways, stay safe while going out this Halloween, and make sure you all have fun. See ya!
Ay, 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 ay.